Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics for the PowerBasic Windows Compiler. Today we will look again at the use of graphics controls and animation to have two separate timers driving two separate graphics controls. At the end of the last video, we had created an application which displayed a form on the screen to our users. In the top left-hand corner of this form was an animated graphics control, displaying a series of images containing a logo. These images were driven by a timer on the form to show 10 frames of animation every second. However, today we're going to take this one stage further. We're going to add a second graphics control, and we're going to have these two graphics controls working quite independently of each other and the main form itself, again using another timer. On this form, the first thing we'll need to do is to create a new graphics control. So we'll clone the graphics control we've got and we'll make this one a little bit bigger. But to give us a bit more room, we're going to move the telephone box on the form down below beside the department. This will allow us to create a larger graphics control. So if we click on the existing one, do a Ctrl C, and then a Ctrl V, this clones our graphics control. And we will make our form a little bit wider to allow the graphics control plenty of room. And we'll call this new graphics control GC Chart. So we will save this and return to the main code section. And to allow for our second timer, we're going to add a new constant. We're going to create timer number 2. And we're going to display on this graphics control a series of chart animations. And as we did in the last video, we're going to create a global array to hold each of these frames. And we'll call this global array strCharts. So we now have two global arrays, one for graphics and one for charts. Before we go any further, we'll need to actually have some graphics we can display on this graphics control. So within our code, we have a folder called Images, which currently holds the 50 frames for the logo. So we're going to add another 22 frames to allow us to display the chart images. And there we have another 22 files, starting from frame 1 up to frame number 22. So currently in this application we have a single timer, triggering every 100 milliseconds. If we go into the callback function, the event handler, if we scroll down to the beginning of the initialize dialog, we'll see this is where the timer is actually set up. And there's the API call to create timer number 1. So using the same command, we can now create a timer for timer number 2, using the constant we declared earlier. And while the first timer is triggering every 100 milliseconds, this second timer is going to be triggering once every 1000 milliseconds. That's once per second. As you will see from the code immediately above this, this is where we attached to our graphics control and we set up the graphics for the logo. We now have to do exactly the same approach for our new chart graphics control. So let's create a little space and we will go in and create this. As you will see the last time, we did a redimensioning of the array to set the size of the array, in this case for 50 frames. For this second graphics control, we're only going to have 22 frames. So let's set up the graphics control. The first thing we need to do is to tell PowerBasic that we want to attach this second graphics control, so that all subsequent graphics commands are directed towards that control rather than the one that drives the logos. Next we need to load these new graphics into another array, the global strcharts array. We can reuse the code we used in the last video to use the load file to graphic array function. We merely have to amend the parameters slightly. The name of our files starts with the word frame, and there are 22 files to load. And the name of the graphics control we're pointing this towards is the GC chart graphics control. And the array we're going to be populating is strcharts. The next step was to load the very first frame populated in the array into the graphics control of our choice. So as we had a frame counter for the previous video, we're going to have to create a frame counter for this second graphics control. So we're going to create a new static variable at the top of our function. Where we have the existing static one, we will now create a second frame chart variable. This is going to be used as the frame counter for all of these charts. Having put that in place, we can now load the first frame into our graphics control. Merely by setting the new frame pointer, frame chart, to equal to 1, the first frame. We can then use graphics set bits to pull the frame information out of our global array. And then finally, a graphic redraw to redraw the graphic on the screen. So that will take care of the very first frame. Now we have to look at the timer. We've already got a single timer set up with a timer event. We now have to set one up for the second timer. So in the timer section of our callback function, we're currently handling timer number 1. We need to add to this timer number 2. So as this is already in a case statement, we can just add a second case statement. This will allow us to handle events when timer number 2 triggers. The first thing we need to do is to increment the frame counter for this control. Then we need to check to see whether the frame counter is greater than the size of our array. If that's the case, then we set the frame counter back to number 1. Now we can display the frame on our associated graphics control. Since we do have 2 graphics controls on the form, we need to tell PowerBasic which graphics control it is you wish to write to. So we're going to use the graphics attach command to define our chart graphics control. Then we're using the setBits command again to take the frame number out of our charts array and to display it to the user on screen with the graphics redraw. Because we have 2 graphics controls, we'll need to use this command also on the first timer to ensure when it triggers it always writes to the correct graphics control. Like so. This one is writing to the logo graphics control, and the second one is writing to the charts control. With these in place, we should now be able to compile and run our application. So our application compiles quite cleanly. Let's try running it now. And there we can see we have 2 graphics controls working independently. The logo graphics control is still displaying at 10 frames a second. However, the second graphics control is displaying only once every second. And once it has reached its 22 frames, it will then repeat and start back at frame number 1. While all this is going on, your form is still quite usable. We can type into the form, we can hit the Do It button, and the Do It button generates a modal message box. If you try and click elsewhere in the form, it won't let you because it is a modal message box. But it doesn't stop the 2 graphics controls still running through their animations. They are running quite independently of the form's modal box. So what we've achieved today is we've added a second graphics control on the existing form. This second graphics control is being populated by a completely separate set of graphics and running on a separate timer, running at a different rate from the first timer. So you can see on a form it's quite easy to set up multiple timers doing different things at different times. Hopefully you'll find this code useful in your applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.